I think there's some seats over here. And there's one over there. So good morning and welcome on this beautiful day. It's a little muggy, but it's a beautiful day. I'm glad you're here. Anyone here for the first time? Ah, good. Welcome, welcome. Glad to see you here. So the way we generally begin any Dharma talk is by reciting the refuge prayer. Basically a vow to practice virtue for the benefit of all beings and to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It's not only called a refuge prayer, it's also called a refuge vow. Can everybody hear me, first of all? I sometimes speak real soft, so if anybody can't hear, just raise their hand. So it's on this little sheet here, and we'll recite it together in English 3 times. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. Again, welcome to all of you, especially those who have come here for the first time. So my name is Lama Tom, and I've been coming here probably for about 24 years. So I've been around for a while. But welcome to all those new folks that are here. I sort of passed the speed limit when I came here this morning because I woke up a little late. So I need to just calm down a little bit before I get started. So today we're going to talk about the paramitas. And paramitas are virtuous actions committed or done by a bodhisattva, and I'll explain that. Last month, I talked about the virtuous action of generosity, and we'll do a short review of that later on. But first, let's define what a bodhisattva is. A bodhisattva is a person seeking to wake up, not just for themselves, but for all beings, for the benefit of all beings. That's what we recited in the refuge prayer. And we aspire to benefit all beings. You might say bodhisattvas are heroines and heroes of the Mahayana vehicle, Buddhist vehicle, the greater vehicle that leads to awakening. So you could say that the paramitas represent the living journey we take towards awakening. A bodhisattva's journey is an action in love, as Khenpo Ken Holmes says. Just to let you know, there is a bodhisattva vow that you can take after you've taken the refuge vow here, and Lama Kathy gives it frequently. And that vow deepens our commitment to realization and enlightenment through selfless, virtuous actions, the paramitas that we're going to talk about. And we'll talk about the nature of vows in just a moment. But first, let's talk a little bit about the Bodhisattva path. you and I, if we've taken the refuge vow and then taken the bodhisattva vow, we're bodhisattvas in training, working to become full-fledged bodhisattvas. So we train our behavior or our conduct. We train our minds, and we train in profound wisdom. Those three, they're called the three trainings: the training in conduct, the training of our mind, and our training in wisdom. As we go along on the Buddhist path, it will become clearer why that's all necessary. But right now, right conduct has to do with our daily lives, what we say and what we do with our body and speech. Now, in meditation, we're dealing with our monkey minds, as Mingyur Rinpoche calls it. Meditation brings peace, choice, and control in our messy lives. Now, with wisdom, we're looking at the very nature of our mind, and we see beyond any particular appearance of it. So wisdom is down the road for us. Now let's go back to right conduct. Basically, our bodhisattva conduct can be divided up into the paramitas of generosity, ethical or moral behavior, and patience or forbearance. Last month, as I said, I talked about generosity. But this month, we're going to talk about, and this Sunday, we're going to talk about ethical conduct. And next month, I'll talk about patience. And hopefully before the year is out, I'm going to talk about all 6 paramitas. I have to warn you, though, I've tried twice before to finish all the paramitas, never done it. I got up to wisdom and it just never got beyond that. So maybe this year I'll be able to do that. So let's look at the meaning of paramita. The word itself literally means far shore. And this is referring to the idea that our present suffering existence is like an ocean. And the far shore is nirvana. So a paramita is what gets us to the far shore, to awakening. Because of that, the virtues, paramitas, are not ordinary worldly virtues. Selflessness is our key to the practice of the paramitas. And it is without regard for self or any worldly benefits derived from our effort. And we are unbiased as to whom our service is given. That's a pretty tall order, and we work on that. That's why we're in training. So no regard, as they say, to the doer, the action, or the object. So I'm not thinking of the separation between myself, the act, and the person to whom I am giving it. There's no distance between them. If we have a perfect act within with virtue. So, you know, the perfection of these virtues are a bit in the distance for all of us. Right now, we sort of vaguely understand what this means. And as we go along, it becomes easier to understand. But right now, you can just think of that there is a oneness between myself, what is being given or what is being done, and the person to whom it is performed. Also, as we begin to practice the paramitas, the actions leading to awakening, we strive to have the best motivation. And the best motivation for any action is to benefit other beings. So you could do something very simple. You could give a glass of water to another human being. And if you have the motivation that I am doing this to help this individual, but later on, may this act represent my benefiting all beings, being able to help all beings. And so that little thing of giving water to another individual takes on immeasurable benefit for you and for all beings. So with a paramita, an act of virtue within the Mahayana, motivation is really important. In the middle of the action, there is no attachment to doing the action. So first of all, we have the right motivation. In the beginning, in the middle, we have no attachment to the doing of the act. It's like dropping that inner dialogue that we often do with ourselves about me, my, and I. When you are performing an action of virtue within the Mahayana, there is no consideration of me, my, or I. You could talk a lot about that, but we don't have time today. We'll just say there's lack of attachment. Finally, if it is an act of virtue within the Mahayana, a paramita, there's dedication at the end. It's letting go. And we'll do that at the very end of our talk today. We'll do a dedication. And it's letting go. Dedication allows us to let go and give the benefits of what we're doing to all beings, instead of sometimes our sort of wanting to pat ourselves on the back and say, what a great job I did. So again, if we do what we've just said, which is, again, to have a right motivation, to have an attitude of selflessness, and dedicate that, every small act we perform has virtue within it. Immeasurable benefit. And so as bodhisattvas in training, this is how we strive to act and to practice until we can do it perfectly. But we are in training and we are not practicing with perfection. We are practicing. And practice here means to integrate what we understand into action and realization. The Tibetan words for I've lost my place. The Tibetan words for practice means bringing to experience, making it real. So when we're practicing, whatever it is we're practicing, it is to bring into our experience, into our reality, what we know intellectually. That's the importance of practice. As I said before, last month we talked about generosity. In Sanskrit, it is called dana, which means sweeping away. Keeping in mind we're training. We are learning to sweep away our self-centeredness through acts of generosity, sweeping away our ego fixation. So let's go back to this Sunday's paramita. We're going to talk about the paramita of right conduct or Buddhist ethics. I will say it here and I will repeat this later. This virtue is not achieved by pious maintenance of rules. I'm going to repeat that. It's not achieved by pious maintenance of rules. Ultimately, its perfection comes from an awareness of the empty appearance of all things, all phenomena. Something we'll work on in meditation, study, and contemplation. This is the way it is with all paramitas. Their perfection comes about through an awareness or a realization of the empty nature of appearances. Again, right conduct or ethics concerns our daily lives and is focused on actions of body and speech. Right conduct is living by the best ethics, which are based on the previous virtue of generosity. So there's a certain order to all these virtues based upon the initiation of the previous virtue. It's like this: through generosity, we begin to develop the ability to act selflessly. Through generosity, we have diminished self-interest, and so we can act in a more moral way. Thrangu Rinpoche writes about this virtue in his commentary on the Jewel Ornament of Liberation book. By the way, that's probably in the library, I'm sure it is. So he's written a commentary about it, and this is the commentary. I recommend both books, particularly Thrangu Rinpoche's, because he does a nice job of explaining things. Anyway, he said about right conduct, we are not talking about something harsh or hard, like we're not being tied down, not like crying like a baby because we weren't allowed candy. It's not like a child wanting to go out and play and the parents won't let them, saying, you can't go out, you have to stay in the house. It's not like that. Buddhist moral ethics, unlike the major theistic religions, is not about a divine command that forbids stuff. So it's important to know that moral ethics does not prevent us from enjoying life. We certainly, the most happy people I know are the most moral and ethical people. So it's like this: moral behavior frees us from the suffering that results when we don't maintain such behavior. For example, if you vow not to kill, not to steal, not to engage in sexual misconduct, you and I are free from the pain and the suffering that result from these behaviors. It's just really that simple. We can look at Buddhist morality from this perspective of logic based upon our human situation. It's a fact of life. If we always follow our desires, we get lost in that following and grasping after what we desire. I mean, isn't that the way it is? We lose our free will. It's easy to become a slave to our desires. And so, desire can be the tyrant in our lives. Say someone's fond of drinking, and I was at one time. They can easily lose their free will. They become slaves to alcohol. As soon as we get hooked on something, we lose our freedom and our ability to choose. This is the nature of unrestrained desire. This story of desire is basically what we live in, this realm of desire. We lose our freedom. And so we will experience the consequences of that lack of freedom. So the first thing to note about Buddhist ethics is its foundation, which is restraint. Not allowing desire to rule our lives and our decisions. In addition, Buddhist ethics has a quality to that restraint. And that quality is intention, an intention to restrain, so that we add a mindful element to this restraint. So it follows that in Buddhist morality, vows and commitment add that dimension of mindfulness and intention to what we do in moral actions. Vows and commitments are keys to our moral behavior within the Buddhist way of thinking. So it is in that way we take vows and we make commitments to restrain behaviors. Vow to produce positive actions. A vow or a commitment, in that case, can be very meaningful. And that's really why commitments and vows are the focal point of Buddhist conduct. Consider the importance of mindful intention in this way. Let's say a person did not kill today. Let's say another person didn't steal on that same day. And another person didn't lie. You know, of course we're going to be happy they didn't do that, right? And it's good they didn't. But will they benefit? Are they benefiting from that action? And according to the Buddhist way of thinking, the answer is no. Would we attribute virtue to them because they didn't do those things? No. It simply happened on this particular day. They didn't kill, steal, or lie. It was just a happy accident. It wasn't something they intended. It just sort of happened. It could be that the next day, based upon their habits, they might kill, steal, or lie. Especially if they were liars, killers, or murderers, you know. So their actions were not a matter of intentional restraint or practice virtue. It was just happenstance, a happy accident, but again, good for all of us, good for society. There's a fasting feast, a fasting practice we do called Nune. And in that we take what are called lay vows. And basically we vow not to steal, lie, commit sexual misconduct, and some other things. And I remember the first time I took that vow, I said, well, you know, I'm not going to do that anyway. What's the value in that? And so now, in light of what I understand, I see that. That day, we intended not to lie, to steal. And in fact, we could take it to an even greater level. We were very careful about what we said. You know, it's just not we didn't lie, but we didn't engage in sarcasm, exaggeration, and that sort of thing. So we took it to another level. So now I sort of understand what I'm doing when I'm making those kind of vows. They make sense from a Buddhist perspective. Gompopa, who was a saint, a Tibetan saint, a yogi, sort of a wild and crazy kind of a guy that lived 1,000 years ago. Gompopa was his student, and Gompopa was also the teacher of our first Karmapa. Anyway, Gompopa said there are 4 things about moral conduct. The first is we take a vow, creating the intention that may last one day. And in terms of the Nune vow, it's one day. We take that vow, and that vow ends at the daybreak of the next day. So we can take a vow for one day, 1 week, 1 month, a lifetime, or lifetimes. So that's the first thing. We take a vow. The second thing about moral behavior is that it includes a pure intention. We've talked about this already. It's without unbecoming motivations like gain for the attention of others, worldly respect, money, prestige. And Gompopa said something's really cool. He said, part of moral behavior is renewing those vows when they decline. Let's face it, we're human beings. We may make a vow, and it may decline. We may actually break the vow. So it is part of moral behavior to renew them. And he said, finally, that part of moral behavior is being mindful and respectful of that vow. So I took the refuge vow or refuge prayer when I came here. So I really need to respect that and keep that in mind. There was Khenpo. I tell this story frequently. A student that I was working with was wanting some really big kind of a practice, profound practice to engage in. And he went to this Khenpo and he said, give me a really profound practice. And the Khenpo said, say at different times during the day the refuge vow. Just do that. The student was disappointed, but later came back to me and said, oh my, that was pretty profound. So we respect once we have taken this vow and be mindful of it. Furthermore, when we talk about vows, and Thrangu Rinpoche talks about this, he said we can divide the vows into 3 categories. We sort of implied this all along. The first category would be the moral ethics of restraint. We've just talked about that. Here we are eliminating negative behavior, and again does not mean we are forbidding what's nice. It's not like the Buddha is coming along and telling us you cannot have fun because of the Dharma. It's not like forbidding the child to eat sweets. It's more like telling the child not to drink poison. And in a way, it's irrelevant whether the Buddha said it or not, because such actions are the root of suffering. Going again back to our example, the child. If the child wants to put their hands in the fire, the parents might say, don't. But whether they say don't or not, the child will get burnt when their hands touch the fire. So it doesn't matter whether Buddha tells us or not. If we do it, we're going to get burnt. It makes no difference. It is simply the truth. And the truth is that if we don't give up negative actions, we suffer the results. Making vows to avoid negative actions helps us to avoid suffering. So again, the first category would be the moral ethics of restraint. The next one is, Thrangu Rinpoche talks about a second kind of ethical behavior, and it's called the morality of accumulating positive virtue. It's pretty simple to understand, I think. Here, we practice everything that is positive, everything that is virtuous, and in this respect, we do not harm other beings, and we will be creating the causes of happiness. So let's go with some examples that Gompopa gives us. Performing service. Rejoicing in the good qualities of others. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I see the good qualities of others, I get jealous. I sometimes even say, they don't deserve that. How did they get that way? They're just naturally gifted or something of this sort. So it's virtuous to be able to actually rejoice in the fact that somebody else is doing well. So having patience when others look down on you. Making prayers of aspiration. Protecting our sense doors, all of our sense faculties. And eating moderately, that's what he says. Gompopa says it's also very virtuous to maintain an introspective attitude all the time. That means every once in a while, look where my mind is. During the day, stop. Where's my mind? You might be surprised where it's gone. And it's virtuous to look at that. So looking at what we're doing with our body and speech and mind and being introspective about that is virtuous. And finally, he talks about, in this category, investigating our mistakes and purifying them. So this is about the morality of attaining, or accumulating positive virtue. I'm having my Biden moment here, sorry. The last category of vows are called the morality. I shouldn't have said that, I apologize. I'm not supposed to bring politics into this. That's bad. So, the last category is called the morality of benefiting beings. So this is like when we take the Bodhisattva vow. We vow that from here on out, our actions are going to be directed toward the benefit of other beings. And this is, again, logical. Because if I say I want to be happy and I want to be single-minded in the pursuit of my happiness, exclusive of other beings, and my personal preferences are really important to my own happiness, that's pretty problematic. And we can look at that from a practical standpoint, because we will encounter others who will stand in the way of our personal preferences that we think lead to our happiness. Others will get in the way, will be obstacles. So, according to the Buddhist way of thinking, the best way to achieve happiness is to selflessly benefit others and make them happy. We seek not just this on a short term, but ultimately, we want them to be ultimately happy, free from suffering, and perfectly happy. To perfect our working for the happiness of others, it furthermore should be unbiased. Whoever comes before us, we want to benefit. Normally, when we see somebody, we immediately have our likes and dislikes. You know, it's just sort of like the way we are. I don't know a thing about you, but you know, I don't know a thing about you and I want to know you. A bodhisattva is someone who truly wants to wake up, is unbiased in their approach to other beings. They're not discriminating. So again, some of the classic examples of benefiting others are supporting meaningful, beneficial acts in Dharma. Doing things here at the Dharma, at the center can be helpful. Dispelling the suffering of beings. Showing spiritual methods to those that don't know them. So if you can help someone in a spiritual crisis overcome that, you're doing something that is virtuous. Remembering the kindness of others and repaying it. It's infrequent, you know, it's a minor thing, and I'm old school here, but I don't see a lot of people sending thank you notes anymore, or thanking people for what they have been given. So remembering the kindness of the people around you, just be mindful of the kindness that is being displayed to you, even in small ways, and repaying them, if nothing else, with a thank you. Here's another one that is particularly relevant these days: protecting others from fears, because this is a sort of an age of fear and anxiety, and dispelling the mourning of others, giving people what they need. Sounds simple. Creating joy by reporting the good qualities of other people. You see something that somebody does well, we are so quick to notice and report what someone did badly. But to notice and to report to others the goodness that you saw in another person is virtuous. Creating a refuge for those lacking it. so many folks out there, and perhaps here, sort of are rudderless, without direction. And with Dharma and with our help, we can provide them with refuge. So let's bring this to a fine point. The practice of the Dharma of ethics comes down to three things. Abandon the faults of body, speech, and mind. 2, cultivate the virtues of body, speech, and mind. And do all this 3 with a selfless attitude for all beings. In the classic texts, they talk about the results of ethical behavior. And the first they say is, you're embraced by the Buddhas. The second is, you will feel strength in your body, speech, and mind. It's not selfish that you have when you've did something that's been virtuous, to feel that strength, to feel that stability. And the other thing that happens is, if you conduct yourselves in a moral way, you're going to be trusted. That's really important. If you want to be trusted, you act in a predictably moral way. But I'm going to throw this off a little bit. And I'm going to end with something that Pema Chodron said. And I'm just going to quote it. She says, and try to listen to this. She says, our spiritual development does not always go in a straight line. Sometimes our mind is stable and alert, and other times it's all over the place. You ever feel that? Sometimes you're really point on, you're really there. And the very next moment, you're all over the place. Sometimes we'll reach out to other people, and sometimes we get into our cocoon. We hide there. That's the way it's going to be until we wake up. Some days it's going to be really spot on, and some days, not so. But Pema Chodron said that if our intention, if our commitment, in this case, if our vow remains strong, we will become progressively present and less distracted, more compassionate and less self-centered. And she goes on to say, and this is a pretty important point, keep in mind, she says, that the Mahayana teaching to promote the welfare of beings is more than refraining from prescribed behaviors. We've said that all along. So it's more than refraining from prescribed behaviors. There are times, she says, when what is prohibited might be necessary in order to prevent greater harm. So what might be prohibited might be necessary in order to prevent harm. The only guideline is to benefit beings by doing what is appropriate in the situation. That being the case, we begin to understand why there is so much emphasis placed on taming our mind and the development of compassion and a discerning heart. Tame your mind and develop compassion. They're called the two bodhicittas. A heart of compassion that discerns the nature of things as they really are. Oh my goodness, I finished up early. I do my word count, on the computer, and it tells me how many words, and I figure I talk really slow, and it wouldn't. So we've got plenty of time. This whole area of morality brings up lots of questions sometimes. So ask them, and I will be honest with you. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you that. But, and also if there's a discussion by anybody, and there are microphones on either side. And speak real loud because I can't hear well.
Hi. A lot of what you were talking about seems to be predicated on becoming really conscious of what we're saying and doing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's a big role of meditation, is training for that process.
Yeah. It is important. And what you find when you are meditating is all these thoughts do come up, and you realize when you are meditating, you start to realize just how much of a monkey mind you really have. And you become aware of that. And there's nothing, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, to become aware of who we are and what we are at the time. Good morning.
Grateful to be here, and thank you for your teaching today. To your point about there is a certain relativism to, or situational dependency on conducting, that moral behaviors aren't necessarily always prescribed, right? So you might have to refrain from one in order to generate. So in the STEP program, recovery programs, we make direct amends to whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And that's what I hear, which is that in the process of trying to make amends, you could actually, which might involve any number of things, that actually could end up injuring the person more than helping him. And you have to ask, well, who's this for and what this is about? Is this about me, or is this truly about them?
Yeah.
So, so that might mean there might be things that you would like to disclose because you're carrying things around. But if you were to disclose that, one, the question is, do they really need to know that in order for them to be happy? And two, would disclosing things also benefit and help them, or would it actually just generate more harm? And so, in which case, are you disclosing because you truly want to help them again, or are you disclosing because it's about you and what you need to do? So those might be examples of the type of thing we're talking about.
Thank you. Those are excellent points.
Is that
Thank
fair?
you. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sometimes we do things to folks when our minds are wild or whatever that we regret. And there is this impulse to want to seek forgiveness from that individual. And sometimes that does more harm than good, as you're pointing out. I think that's one of your points, right? And you have to sort of sit with that. And recognize the fact that they can't accept your apology, and they're still hurting. And yeah, that's one of the consequences we have to sort of sit with sometimes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lama Tom. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Paul.
So you talked about bodhisattvas in training. I consider myself that, in training, definitely. Which that suggests that there are bodhisattvas who have completed their training, got their completed their training,
Okay.
got their diplomas, so to speak.
We haven't got that yet.
Yeah, so, but we assume that such people exist, correct? Can you hear me? Am I not?
You have to speak real, not only loudly, but distinctly. I can't hear very well.
Okay. How's that?
That's better.
Okay. So we assume, don't we, that there are bodhisattvas who have sort of gotten there. They've completed their training. Okay. And all the rest of us aspire to that.
That's correct.
And I'm also assuming, but I want to see what you think, that most of us we can't necessarily expect to reach that level of perfection in this life. So would it be realistic to assume that we keep aspiring, but it's not out of the question that we're not likely to reach that level of perfection, that it's hard to do, and that we just keep on plugging away. Does that make sense?
Of course it does. The other thing I say, while it's realistic to expect that we might not, why not think that it might be possible? If it weren't possible, what would be the reason to aspire? And the other thing that I am privileged to have seen is folks that I believe have reached that level. My teacher, Khenpo Ken Rinpoche, was the very presence of a bodhisattva. And so he gives me an example, and you're right, Paul, may never get there, but I have no doubt there are people that have, and there are no doubt that I could. Now, the difference between Khenpo Ken Rinpoche and myself is he was diligent and I'm as lazy as they come. But if I were more diligent, more mindful, there is no doubt that I could reach that level.
Okay. That's an important point. I appreciate that. There's no reason to assume that we can't.
There's no reason.
Yeah.
Because there are examples.
Who knows? And it is possible,
Yeah.
And that creates the aspiration.
That creates the aspiration.
And it makes the aspiration, let's say, perhaps optimistic, but still realistic.
I'm not even going to go there about optimism or pessimism. I'm just going to make that aspiration. Here's the other thing. It's really important that when you make an aspiration, you have no regard for result.
Yeah.
No expectation that it's going to happen, but no fear if it doesn't. We don't, we do it because we know that that's where we want to go. But it's without fear that I won't, because if I feared, I wouldn't even try. Nor hope, because, that's ego. That's me wanting something. It's just I do it because that's where I want to go.
Yeah. Great. Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah. Good morning.
How are you, Lama Tom?
Good.
I have a fear of taking vows.
Fear of taking vows?
I'm afraid I'm going to break it within the next few minutes.
Yeah, I get that. Some vows are very easy to break. Some vows are sort of hard to break. Like I said, I vowed not to kill. Well, I'm pretty safe in that. I've taken the Bodhisattva vow, which is I will always put others before myself. I break that vow frequently. And that's not to be feared. The fear is that I won't try to repair that vow. Recall it, as we said before, be mindful of it and renew it. So that's why we do the refuge vow every time we meet. Why? Because let's face it, we leave here, we're going to take refuge in, all kinds of stuff. And so that's why we have to go back and do that, why we have to refresh our vow. So there's no reason to fear. The fear is that you will drop it altogether. That would be the fear. So I'm an aspiring bodhisattva who breaks that vow daily. But daily I go back and say, I want to benefit other beings. And that's good enough. The vow in that case is sort of like the guidepost, putting me in the right direction.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. What I heard today in your message was like an underlying tone of patience, having patience with it all.
Patience?
Patience, yeah.
Yes.
Patience in the journey of getting to the diploma, so you will. Curious about the patience and having the compassion for others, taming your mind and having compassion for others. In the moment, say you're having compassion for a person, your intention might be very well, but their intention to receive. Intention. Your intention may be very well, but their intention to receive or how they receive may not be as well. How do you keep that peace within yourself when having that exchange with another?
So your intention is to be
Compassionate.
compassionate, and they're not receptive to that.
Yes.
Okay. The idea here is you're doing it regardless of the result. We don't know. I may be kind to an individual and they return it with anger or whatever. So this means we have to be patient, doesn't it? And that means forbearance. That means waiting for them to come around if they will. But willing to accept the fact that they're not coming around. Our job is to be patient. Our job is to be compassionate without regard for results. And that's hard. We all, because of our ego, we all want to be patted on the back, or we all want to be saying, oh, what a compassionate individual you are. How lovely. It doesn't happen that way in the real world, really. And so you do have to be patient. Yeah.
That's helpful. It's the focus on the action and not the result is helpful.
Yeah,
context.
absolutely. You got it. You got it. We just, if we had perfect understanding of the other individual, we would perfectly know what to do for that person in that situation. The fact is, we are imperfect. We don't know how all the time to approach an individual. All we have that we can be in control of is our own intention. My intention is to be kind, loving, and so forth. How that's received, don't know. And a lot of times, it is not accepted. Yeah. Sad. But true. Any thorny issues that people want to bring up or thoughts? I got to take her.
Thanks for allowing me to double dip. There is an issue I would like to bring forth. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. For people who come, who have been, have a lot of trauma in their background, they come from families where there's a lot of mental illness and addiction, and there's sexual, physical abuse, other types of abuse. In those types of family systems, one of the problems that is typical is the children who grow up from those, if they don't deal with those issues, they can be what are called people pleasers. Now, people pleasing can be very, very damaging, right? And so for those folks who come from those backgrounds, it would seem that there is a balance to be struck between dedicating one's life to easing the suffering of others and or in the process also generating suffering for yourself. You see, there's possibility of denying all the things that you might personally need for wellness so that you can gain the approval, try to gain the love, try to avoid the conflict, try to avoid the rejection from those situations, for example, which is in itself a type of manipulative behavior, also a survival strategy that likely no longer works.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, thank you. What you say is true. There has to be a balance. We live in the real world, and we have to be balanced in our approach to others. We have to take care of ourselves. Because when we think all sentient beings, you're a sentient being. You're part of that all. So you have to take care of you too, being a part of that. Last week, I think it was, or week before last, Lama Yeshe was here and talked about his trauma and the difficulty negotiating, dealing with that in life. Anyone who didn't hear that talk, I believe it's going to be on YouTube. It is on YouTube, and you should go and listen to that. Yeah, people pleasing means sometimes I would do things that would be immoral, actually, to make them happy. And that's not what it's all about, is it? So we have to be careful about that. Thank you for reminding us of that. Well, our time is about up. Thank you for all your questions. So let's dedicate the merit. Again, that's letting go. You came here, you did something virtuous. You were here. And you could walk out this door saying, what a good job I did today. I came and I listened to a Dharma talk, and now I'm sort of virtuous. You know, I'm good. Not the Dharma talk was there, but you were good that you came here. That's not the point. The point is that you're doing this. You're making this effort not only for yourself, but for yourself. Not only for yourself, but for all beings. And so we close with a dedication. Anytime we do a virtuous action, it's always good to dedicate. So let's do that. It's on the back side here. Page 2. We'll say it in English once. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From this ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is. Samantabhadra, who also knows in the same way, and all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path. I completely dedicate all this virtue. Before we go, one other thing. I wanted for all of us to well, no, I want to say goodbye to Rebecca Worthington. She's leaving to go study some more. She's been a very big part of this Sangha, and we will miss her terribly. But don't forget about us. So thank you for being here. Okay. Thank you all.